Yo, Moe Abbassi, back at it again. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about how to beat fear and anxiety in 60 seconds or less. And no, that's not bullshit. As someone who has dealt with a ton of fear throughout his life, from traumas to growing a business to having fears in relationships, and also as someone who's dealt with tons of anxiety attacks, general anxiety, social anxiety, I can tell you that this stuff has changed my life and it is going to change yours as well. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, if you're dealing with severe anxiety, if you're dealing with severe depression, I would suggest you to get professional help, okay? But this stuff is a very good start, and for me, it pretty much destroyed all of my anxiety together. So, before we get into the nitty-gritty, right, the how-to, I want to set the pace first with understanding polarity. And so for every perceived negative that you have in your life, there is also a perceived positive. And now you might be thinking, Mo, what the heck are you talking about? There is no perceived positive to my fear and anxiety. But let me ask you this. Someone who loves spiders, for example, if you put them in a room full of spiders, what's going to happen is they're going to have an amazing time. They're going to look at all the different spiders, pick them up, kiss them, look at furry ones and non-furry ones, and they are just going to have a blast. But then you take someone else, same exact room, nothing about the room has changed. You take someone else who hates spiders, who has a deep fear of spiders, and you put them into that room, and they are going to have a completely opposite reaction. The room hasn't changed. The facts about the spiders hasn't changed. But they are going to be freaking out and probably having a panic attack, crying, screaming, whatever. And so the point of that is that, look, for every sunny day, the only reason you know what a sunny day is because you know what a rainy day is, and vice versa. The only reason you know what cold is because you know what hot is. The only reason you know what happiness is because you know what sadness is, and so on and so forth. And so for every perceived positive in life, there is also a perceived negative, and vice versa. And I want to read you this quote that really exemplifies this. So the quote goes as, "Angels and demons were identical, interchangeable archetypes, all a matter of polarity. The guardian angel who conquered your enemy in battle was perceived by your enemy as a demon destroyer." And so this is to say that if we want to really overcome our fear and anxiety towards something, we have to be able to see things from an equanimous place. We have to be able to see the positives of it and the negatives of it, which we already are experiencing, and be able to make our emotional decision from a very logical and rational place. And I'm going to teach you how to do that. I know that doesn't register right now because you're thinking, well, when I'm having an anxiety attack, I'm all emotion and I can't think logically. Well, we'll get into that. So, to give you an example, I was dealing with a business owner, a client of mine, on one of these group calls that I do. And we were talking about his business and how he just has this massive dread, this angst to sitting down and prospecting. His business requires him to message people, DM people, talk to them, build relationships, and see whether they're interested in his product or service. And so we were talking about how the only bottleneck, he knew exactly what to do, was him sitting down and doing his work of messaging people. And so when we realized, I was like, well, what is the angst behind it? Like, why do you feel dread towards sitting down? So the first step is we need to actually define the fear and anxiety. If we just say we are having fear and anxiety, it doesn't give us much room to work with or to be able to see the negatives and positives of what the fear and anxiety is, because it's so general. It's not specific of what you're actually feeling. And so the first step is to actually define, I'm not sure if you can see that, define the anxiety. So we figured out, I was like, okay, well, why do you not want to sit down? Well, I just don't want to be messaging people for 4 yada yada hours. Okay, so why don't you want to message people for 4 something hours? Well, you know, some people are rude and, you know, they message me weird, yada yada yada. And so we figured out his anxiety, his fear of sitting down was coming from a fear of rejection, which then we go on to step 2, which is to figure out the trigger. Where did this trigger from? Where did this come from? Your fear of rejection. Now, this could be from a childhood experience. This could be from you going to school when you were a kid or school when you were a teenager. This could be something that's happening in your life right now that's causing a lot of anxiety. And so we have to figure out what actually triggered it so that we can make decisive decisions from here on forward. So first we have to define it, then we have to figure out what triggered it so that we can move on to step 3, which is to actually reframe the thought patterns. And so with this person, for example, he was thinking very macro, right? He wasn't able to see what the anxiety was. And we got it all the way down to the micro. And so I asked him in that specific instance, I was like, well, let me ask you this. If you do get rejected and you sit down and you talk to all these people and they're all rejecting you, what are 5 to 10 to 20 plus benefits of that happening? And so we started to list them down. Well, the benefits are, if I get rejected by everyone, then I know what doesn't work. I'll know what to test next to see whether that works or not. I will have at least gotten out of my comfort zone. I will have reached out to people who I can maybe build relationships on down the road, etc., etc., etc. And so when you start to reframe it and you got specific on what the actual fear is, now you're able to see the positive side of the spectrum. And this allows you to start feeling different, because the only reason you feel fear and anxiety is because of your thought patterns. Your thought patterns are disempowered, negative, and it's caused by a certain trigger, and you don't know how to handle it because you don't know what the actual definition of that fear is, why that fear is actually there in the first place. You just think it's general fear, general anxiety. But usually if we dig a little deeper, there is something there that's very, very specific. And so that's why we get specific. That's why we figure out the trigger. And then when we reframe it and we go, well, what are the benefits of the fear that you have happening, and what are the disadvantages of it not happening, which is on the other side of the spectrum, you start to actually interrupt your general anxiety, general fear thought patterns, and you are taking control in that moment to switch them into positive, empowered thinking, which then immediately starts to lower the level that you feel that fear and anxiety with. And so there's a study here, and they did a study on humor that I definitely wanted to read to you because I think it's going to really help exemplify this. So they wrote down, one behavior that has been shown to facilitate cognitive reframing is humor, especially humor that is based on positivity rather than mean-spirited. For example, in one study, participants were exposed to a series of unpleasant pictures. To cope with these pictures, participants were invited to create a positive joke about the picture, a negative joke about the picture, or no joke about the picture. The positive joke tended to elicit positive emotions instead of negative ones, which that's what we're doing here. When we're thinking of the benefits, we are thinking and redirecting the thought patterns into something that is more positive. The authors concluded that positive humor might epitomize a variant of cognitive reframing in which individuals shift their perspective of some unfavorable event or circumstance towards a more positive outlook of the same circumstances. And that's pretty much all you're doing here, is you're taking these negative thought pattern loops that's causing this general fear and anxiety that you think you have, you're breaking down to the micro, figuring out what that fear and anxiety is, figuring out where it actually stemmed from, and then reframing your thought patterns to view it as a positive thing. And when you do this, you actually start to feel better. The anxiety starts to lessen, the fear starts to lessen, and you can move on to step number 4, which is to create a plan of action. In this case, he was able to sit down, do his work no problem, start to actually move his business forward. And in neurolinguistic programming, they call these things reframing and anchoring. And what you're doing is every time you have this specific fear and anxiety, and you think of, and you interrupt the thought patterns, the thought loop, and you think of all the benefits, then you're essentially anchoring that fear and anxiety towards feeling good in a moment, and then also taking action. And the only reason this is happening is because of visualization. Anytime you start to think of the benefits, at the same time you're actually visualizing those things. And so your brain doesn't know the difference between what you're visualizing versus what you're doing. And therefore, when you're visualizing the thing that you thought you were afraid of, doing it successfully, you start to desensitize yourself to that fear. You start to anchor yourself to higher empowered positive emotions from that thing that you fear, and you are able to take action. And this does not take long to do. This can literally be done in less than 60 seconds in your head. You go, okay, well, what am I fearful for of? You know, what's the real anxiety? Okay, it's that. Well, what's the real anxiety behind that? And you go a few levels deeper to get to the micro. You go, where did this come from? Where did this stem from? You figure out the trigger, and then you start to reframe it. Well, what are 5+ benefits of that happening? And you just think of these things in your head. And then by that time, the fear and anxiety should have been lessened a little bit so that you can create a plan of action and you can start to move things forward. Now, I want to say this because I said it at the beginning of the video. I got something in my eye. This is not going to work if you have severe depression or severe anxiety. Okay, with that, it requires professional help. It requires a long-term process, and most of the time requires medication. So if you're watching this and you're like, well, this is not going to help, well, in your case, you might have severe anxiety, and I would suggest reaching out to a professional. So what I want you to do is comment down below right now what fear and anxiety you have all the time, and I want you to write down this process in the comment section below. Define what the fear is, where did it stem from, how can you reframe it into all of the benefits of it, and then what is your plan of action. And if you like this video, this was helpful, comment down below right now, subscribe to the channel, and if you have any questions, I guess, I don't know, comment it down below as well, or message me on Instagram or Facebook. I'll leave the links down below as well, and I'll try to answer your question in a video. Talk soon. Take care.